anti-union consultants that are hired by employers to persuade workers against forming a union. They have to file reports with the federal government disclosing this. And there's a big database on the DOL website. It's just a little bit difficult to navigate, and I don't think a lot of people know about it.
You have to have solidarity even when you're like, what does this person really do for me, right? Because it's not about that.
And my job is to represent them. My personal political views don't matter in this scenario. One message I would pass along to any rep is this: don't tell anybody what they want to hear. Tell them what they need to hear.
When you're in a fight like this, especially with a corporation in this country, no one is going to come down from the mountain and save you.
Welcome back, Solidarity Report listeners. My name is Joshua Town. I am a rank and file NALC, National Association of Letter Carriers, Branch 55 dues-paying union letter carrier, and I am here today with my buddy John Murphy.
Yo, thank you, Josh, for having me come back on again to your podcast. My name is John Murphy. I'm a city letter carrier of the National Association of Letter Carriers, NALC Branch 4716, down here in Florida.
And we have our guests tonight, or today, or in the afternoon if you're listening. McKenna Schueler. Welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So before we get started and we dive into what's going on down in Florida, because she's a freelance writer, labor writer for, what is it, the Orlando...
I'm actually a staff reporter now. I do freelance for other papers, though.
Oh, there you go. That's awesome. I feel like you have your hands in a lot of different things, which is really cool. That's awesome. But before we get started, I just want to reaffirm everyone with the disclaimer. Everyone here is speaking in a personal capacity, which means their thoughts and what they say is inherently their own and do not reflect any entity that is spoken about on this program. With that being said, make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, and YouTube. And if you like what you're hearing, please tell a friend, like, and subscribe to our content. Without further ado, what outlets do you work for, McKenna?
So I'm a staff reporter for Orlando Weekly, the one and only full-time staff reporter. So I have to cover a lot of different beats, but I am personally pretty passionate about the labor movement, and I believe that there is a gap in labor reporting in Florida. So I try to cover workers' rights issues as much as possible, mostly focusing on Central Florida, where I'm based. But I do freelance for other papers too and other publications, including In These Times and other alt weeklies nearby.
Now, is there a specific outlet that really boosted you into the labor movement, or was that just something that you wanted to jump into?
I first really got interested in the labor movement when I was covering the Fight for 15, the $15 minimum wage amendment in Florida that passed successfully with about 61% support in 2020. So I was covering more like local and state politics at the time, but going to the protests and the rallies organized by like rank and file McDonald's workers with SEIU and Fight for 15, I was just really impressed and honestly just energized by the energy at those rallies. And I started talking to more people that were involved in the labor movement and really kind of try to put in the time to invest in learning more about it and how to report on it accurately and in a way that really reflects, the different organizing efforts in Florida.
Okay. And I see here that you're a member of the National Writers Union Freelance Solidarity Project. If you don't mind me asking, what is that?
Yeah, so it's an arm of the National Writers Union that's specifically for freelance content creators, writers, journalists. I joined before I got a full-time staff job because I was interested in trying to advocate for better pay rates and other working conditions for freelancers. Since we don't really necessarily have collective bargaining rights, there are other ways that the union advocates for freelancers. So, like, for instance, in a few states, the Freelance Solidarity Project has worked collaboratively with other organizations to advocate for legislation that just provides basic protections for freelancers, such as like being paid within like 30 days of completing a project. Something so basic that you think wouldn't have to be an issue, but unfortunately it is. So, and there are other working groups and other projects that the union focuses on. But yeah.
I mean, we say this all the time, and when I talk to a couple of people, it's funny because you think basic things like if we were just basically good to each other and we took care of one another and we made sure people got paid on time and we did like just the sheer basic things, you wouldn't need unions, you wouldn't need these things, but you need them because people get taken advantage of all the time. It's just unbelievable how much people get taken advantage of. Now, that being said, how would someone get in contact with you? Like, are you available on different social medias or in general? Like, if someone wanted to get a hold of you and saying, "Oh, I have this big labor situation in Florida," how would someone be like, "Hey, this is the person"? Because you seem to be very knowledgeable and very in tune to what's going on, but say, hey, something out of left field, and how would they be able to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I have a bio page on Orlando Weekly's website that has my email and contact information. I also have a Substack, Carrying Class Revolt, where I specifically do roundups of organizing activity in Florida and union busting activity in Florida. And I have my contact info on that Substack as well. So that's Carrying Class Revolt.
Speaking about union busting stuff in Florida, there was a Senate bill that passed, and I believe it was 256 that passed, and it was like 2023. And I heard you talking on, I can't remember, there was a program, and you were talking about how it would affect Florida, and it seems like 3 years later, it really is affecting what is going on with the unions in Florida.
Yeah, so Florida Senate Bill 256 was passed in 2023 after being introduced multiple times over the years since I think like 2011, because it's basically modeled after Wisconsin's Act 10 of 2011, where it basically, like in a nutshell, it requires more union members to be dues paying members for a union to remain certified while also making it harder to pay dues. So this is a bill that specifically affected most public employee unions, so local and state government, with carve-outs for police unions, firefighters, and correctional officer unions. That is, unions that typically support Republicans for office. And so what the bill did was require that at least 60% of a bargaining unit be dues paying members in those public employee unions. And if they're not, then they have to petition the state for a recertification election every single year. And that requires gathering 30% signatures, signed authorization cards from at least 30% of the bargaining unit, and then submitting that to the state. And there's a lot of other like logistical administrative barriers to doing that as well. And then the bill also banned payroll dues deductions, so basically making it harder for union members to even pay dues. So what we saw in the first year of the implementation was a lot of confusion between unions and the state as far as how to even try to comply with it. So within the first year or two, we've seen more than 120 bargaining units decertified across the state, affecting at least somewhere around the ballpark of 70,000 public employees who have lost their union representation. And I've learned that through trying to track the different decertification information that is really hard to find kind of on the state website. But there have been a couple journalists who have also been trying to track that information as well. And what has been really interesting, though, John was bringing this up earlier, was that most of the K through 12 teachers unions, actually, I think all of them have remained certified, and they were the target of this bill. The governor, Ron DeSantis, and his anti-union allies were really targeting teachers unions with that bill, and it so far hasn't played out. They've mostly stayed strong. They had some anti-union policies they were also facing before this big bill came around, where they already had to have at least 50% membership dues paying. So what we've seen mostly is the decertification of a lot of blue collar workers unions, nurses, even like employees, attorneys employed by the state. And we just also had the passage of another follow-up bill this year that's actually going to make it even harder. So, yeah.
What bill is that now?
That is Senate Bill 1296, and that was pushed by the same anti-union forces that pushed for 256. So these out-of-state think tanks like the Freedom Foundation, the Mackinac Center, Americans for Prosperity, the Koch-funded founded group. And that bill is going to be honestly like a pretty tough barrier for even the teachers unions to meet, because it goes after the election thresholds and participation. So effective July 1st, all of these unions that are going through these recertification elections annually, they have to have at least 50% participation, so voter turnout in the election. And of that 50%, at least 50% plus one have to vote in favor of recertifying. And that applies to not just recertification elections, but also just like elections forming a union or even decertifying a union. So ironically, the state also made it harder for workers to decertify their own unions. They just made it easier for the state to do so.
And as we transition, everyone's like, oh, well, can you give us one example? You recently just wrote an article for Orlando Weekly. Blue collar city workers on Florida's Space Coast form new union. It talks about workers forming a new union that they used to be represented by the International Labor's Union, and now they're officially recognized and organized by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW. Can you tie this into how this tied in with Senate Bill 256 and how the workers were actually able to achieve the drastic measures that the anti-union politicians and special interests have set forth?
Yeah, so that is one hopeful case that we've seen out of this. I've tracked at least, including this new bargaining unit, at least 10 bargaining units that saw their unions decertified under that Senate Bill 256 due to noncompliance with the new regulations, what have you. They're one of the first groups now to reorganize. There have been some unions that have reorganized with the same union or a different union, but it really just goes to show that workers weren't asking for this law. And now that we're seeing that they're trying to reorganize because they want a union and they want the protections and benefits that they get from having union representation. So the article that I wrote recently was about a group of workers in Titusville, Florida, which is on the Space Coast, kind of near the Kennedy Space Center and such. There were blue collar workers there that were represented by LiUNA, and they saw their union decertified because they had below 60% union membership, and the union did not file a petition for recertification, so they were just automatically decertified. And so a few months after that happened, I was looking at state records and I saw that they had petitioned for a union election with the IBEW, a local actually in Orlando. So I reached out to the leadership there and kind of learned more about that organizing campaign. And just to reiterate myself again, just like hearing from the business manager there that these are workers who they want to have a union. They want to have a strong fighting union that will advocate for their wages and working conditions. So it took quite a while. I think they first petitioned last fall for a union election. So it's taken quite a few months. But then I think it was last month or the month before that they finally had a union election and overwhelmingly voted in favor of forming a new union with the IBEW.
Cool. I want to highlight the drasticness of this, right? Florida's a right to work state. Governor Ron DeSantis is very anti-union, and you have special interest groups. So in Florida currently, you have around 27% of the public sector is unionized, compared to just 3% 3% of the state's private sector. So the public sector is very organized and very collective. And Rich Templin, the director of politics and public policy for the Florida AFL-CIO, stated the Florida legislature and their billionaire backers are trying to eliminate the rights of public sector workers to organize and collectively bargain. The only reason they haven't wiped it out completely is because it's protected in Article 1, Section 6 of the state constitution. And like you're just saying, people want unions, right? People in Florida want unions, but the state and special interests come after them. And with IBEW Local 606 representing them, these workers now have a voice again in their workplace and in their communities. And have you talked to any of these workers yet about their feelings?
I haven't been able to connect with them yet. I tried to reach out to the union leadership to coordinate some interviews a few weeks ago, but they said that they're just going into negotiations and they were a little bit worried about upsetting the employer. But I'm really hoping that I can find some folks to talk to, because I think it's really important to hear from workers themselves about why they're reorganizing and what's important to them about doing that.
And any feedback from the Laborers International Union? Do they even have a branch or a local still in Florida, or do they just up and leave?
I think they do. Yeah, they do still have one. The one that actually used to represent these workers, Local 630. I think they do still represent some public sector bargaining units, and I think they petitioned to represent a couple others. And when I reached out to them, they did graciously give me a statement just saying that they're continuing to fight and that they're not going to back down to these anti-union bullies in Florida. I think there's probably some internal decisions being made about how they're using their resources, and maybe internal conversations between union members about who is really willing to fight. But I haven't heard from any union in Florida that's just like, we're going to give up. I think there's a lot of internal challenges that I'm not necessarily privy to, but I think there's still a lot of momentum to keep fighting and keep organizing and not let these anti-union forces that are trying to make an example out of Florida win.
And I think the crazy part too is, if you think about it as a laborer down in Florida, you not only have, if you're a private sector, you not only have these companies spending monies to bust your union, but now you also have the legislator actively like making it harder to keep your union and making it harder to establish a union and all these things. At what point do you think that that's going to reflect at the polls?
I don't know. That's a really good question, because I still I think one of the biggest struggles is that there's not really a union culture in Florida. There's maybe a lot of retirees that have come down that used to be in unions from up north or in other states where that is more union density is higher. But I do think that's a really interesting question, in part because last year, Utah, for instance, there was a bill that was passed there that banned collective bargaining for public employees. And what they managed to do was those public employees, a coalition of 21 unions, managed to come together, and they organized a petition drive to get a repeal ballot referendum. And I think they managed to get something like over 250,000 signatures from the public. And this is in also a Republican controlled state. So I don't know how they managed to do it, but they really fought hard. And instead of going to the ballot, the Republican lawmakers just repealed it because they saw that they were losing that fight.
Well, that's the thing too. The last time I had my brother John on with us, we were actually talking with a president of the Durham Association of Educators, and they were able to make a big action on May Day. And they were able to, what was it? How many districts did they close down on May Day?
20% of the state's school districts were shut down on May 1st, 2026. And a few weeks later, the state finally passed a budget that included pay raises for the teachers.
And this is an area where they don't have collective bargaining either. They don't have a contract. it's very bizarre to have a union and not have a CBA, especially coming from up north. Like that's all I've ever experienced is up north, and hearing these things, it really opens your eyes. And I have a couple coworkers that listen to this, and they were just shocked to hear these things. And it's like, well, I mean, it's 2026. We need to start realizing this as a country that we're all on different playing fields because of the laws we have and because of the camaraderie we have with our coworkers, and kind of that being said, I'd like to transition into what's going on with Amazon as a private sector place that does a lot to bust unions. How's that going on down in Florida? Because I hear there's a lot of stuff going on with Amazon down in Florida.
Yeah, so I don't know about a lot of Amazon organizing, but there's a lot of union avoidance consultants that are based in Central Florida and in Florida broadly. And I've kind of taken it upon myself to try and help track this activity by these Florida-based consultants because there honestly like isn't a lot of coverage anywhere about a lot of this stuff, in part because I think it's a little bit difficult to kind of like navigate the federal government where basically like under the let me get this right, the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act, I think it's called, these anti-union consultants that are hired by employers to persuade workers against forming a union, they have to file reports with the federal government disclosing this. And there's a big database on the DOL website. It's just a little bit difficult to navigate, and I don't think a lot of people know about it. But you can go to it and you can search your employer and you can see how much they've paid people to convince you, your coworkers, or other employees against forming a union. And you can also find the names of these consultants and their disclosure reports. Typically, reporting at this point, the going rate is about $400 plus an hour that these consultants are being paid. And they call themselves labor relations consultants or sometimes persuaders or union avoidance consultants, otherwise known as union busters. And some of them are attorneys, some of them aren't, but they are, yeah, they're paid to persuade people against forming a union. And there's quite a few of them that are based in Florida that are very active, including many that have worked for Amazon specifically. Amazon reported spending over $26 million on these consultants last year. And that's not even counting how much money they spend on these anti-union law firms, legal counsel that don't interact with workers directly. Because if they don't interact with workers directly, they don't necessarily have to file these disclosure reports right now. And so that's a big loophole. But it also just kind of hides how much money these big corporations like Amazon are paying.
Oh, it's like they whisper into the management's ear right there. They're management whisperers.
Yeah.
In one of your most recent articles for the Orlando Weekly called "The Union Avoidance Industry is Worth $1.7 billion." Florida union busters are cashing in. Mm-hmm. You write U.S. employers collectively spend an estimated $1.7 billion each year to prevent their workers from unionizing, and this ties into the laborers local that we just talked about representing. They're still, like, these unions are still in these states trying to organize workers because the labor unions are the only organizations workers have. And labor unions are only funded through union dues, not from Wall Street, not from special interests. So these organizations, these labor unions, are in Florida and all 50 states fighting tooth and nail to revive labor and to give everyone a secure retirement and a roof over their heads. But we have Wall Street and special interests spending billions of dollars a year to come into our workplaces to tell people that unions are bad. We have them have classes to teach employers on what to say and look for. I worked at Whole Foods for a little bit when I moved down here as a butcher, and Whole Foods has a whole program of what the store managers should look for. If 3 or more people are talking in a group, go look for them. If that person does it with another group of people, go look for that person. And they have like designs. They have like a whole apparatus of union busting. And it's kind of weird that it's located in Florida as the hub. So my question is, why Florida? Why is this all happening in Florida as like their headquarters? Or am I interpreting this wrong?
Well, there's definitely a few like high profile union avoidance firms that are involved with Amazon, and they're not all based in Florida, but there is one in on the Space Coast, also in Satellite Beach. They're based in Satellite Beach, and now they have an office in DC. It's called Road Warrior Productions, and they've been working for Amazon for years. They were also part of targeting, I believe, the Staten Island effort with the Amazon Labor Union and the RWDSU effort in North Carolina. They were dispatched. Their consultants were dispatched to that effort too in 2021. And they're one of the bigger players. They've collectively been paid, I think, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but definitely millions of dollars to dispatch like dozens of consultants to different Amazon facilities across the country, not usually in Florida. So they're usually dispatching them elsewhere. But they're definitely one of the bigger names that Amazon tends to turn to. And that's an interesting one, too, because I learned through some of my digging into some of these federal records that one of the consultants that was working for this firm, Road Warrior Productions, is actually now a sitting city council member in South Florida, a tiny, tiny city. I managed to kind of like cross-match information to verify it was him through like email addresses and business addresses and everything else. But that was something interesting I learned. And he was union busting before he actually became a city councilman. I don't think he does it anymore, but he also just may not be filing his disclosure reports. I don't know. I don't know how much time he has on his hands. But, and there's also these union avoidance consultants that work for these firms. Some of them are actually former union officials themselves who turned to the dark side, so to speak, or just, sort of switched to the other side for some reason or another. Some of them have spoken publicly on podcasts or to other reporters about how they, just became disillusioned with unions or they had some sort of bad experience. Some of them were kicked out or actually found guilty of certain charges that got them to be kicked out of the union. Labor Lab, for instance, is a union buster watchdog nonprofit. They have a lot of information and profiles specifically about some of these consultants. But I try to do what I can to track the activity of those that are based in Florida. And I do that on my Substack, Caring Class Revolt. And to just kind of like name the price tags that these employers are paying to convince their workers that they don't need to advocate for their own higher wages or better benefits or working conditions.
And I think to tie it in with Amazon workers, the union busting, I think everyone sees it with Starbucks. If you're paying attention, if you're listening to this, you're probably familiar with the Starbucks Workers United movement. They're winning union elections, right? But they still haven't got a contract. They haven't got a collective bargaining agreement. But you hear stories of union busters going in to these stores and talking to the workers individually and dividing them. And I don't know. It makes me mad that all this money from special interests are going in 2026 still to divide and conquer the workforce. And I think one of the biggest things that I want other people to become aware of is this happens in blue states, red states, like every corner of the country. This doesn't just happen in the right to work. And this is what I was kind of referencing before with the question. So you have employers like you got the Detroit Big Three and the automakers, and they're going from the northern states down to the southern states, right? We have Kia and Hyundai. We have Volkswagen down here in the south now, and these governors and special interests are giving them tax credits and writing laws to break the unions before they even get established. So if anyone's listening, please, whenever you see a labor struggle in the news and the headlines or down the street, get involved with them. Elon Musk literally just became a trillionaire. So yeah, before we move on to a more uplifting story, can you answer this common theory? Right to work laws. Do these laws allow for this type of action in this environment in these types of states to have such a big anti-union culture? Like, is right to work tied to the anti-union culture that's down here in Florida, or is just the lack of unions is the reason why there's a union culture?
Well, I think it's kind of both because right to work means that workers don't have to, even if they're represented by a union, they don't have to pay dues to be a part of the union and to benefit from the union. And so that means that unions are getting fewer resources. So they're being starved of the resources that they could be using to build stronger fighting unions. So I think that does contribute to there not being as much of a union culture down here, is that our unions don't have as many resources as those in non-right to work states.
Because like one of the things is when I moved down here from Massachusetts, I think I read one of your articles a few years ago saying that the state of Florida doesn't even have a Department of Labor.
Nope.
So can you explain what that even means? So say if I'm working non-union at Publix, the grocery store down here, and I noticed that they didn't pay me for 20 hours of wages, who would I turn to for that, to get that 20 hours back?
Yeah, so that's a fun story. So about 24 years ago, then Governor Jeb Bush abolished the State Department of Labor, and that included, the division that handled minimum wage violations and even worker safety issues. So we don't have a state OSHA or anything either. But that example, so the only elected official or state official in Florida that's authorized to enforce the state minimum wage is the state attorney general. And there's been very little evidence that any state attorney general since the DOL was abolished here has ever actually really done a lot to enforce the minimum wage. And that's important because in that circumstance, you would really have to either turn to a private lawyer or go to the federal Department of Labor. But the problem is the federal Department of Labor can only enforce the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour, whereas Florida's minimum wage is now $14 an hour, and it's about to go up to $15 an hour. So that creates a problem. It also creates a huge backlog for the federal DOL. So I've obtained public records of these communications between workers and the state agency and the DOL, and you'll see them just kind of like pointing at each other, like, "Hey, you should go talk to the state agency. Oh, the state agency says you should go to the federal Department of Labor." So it's like, how do you actually get help? And so Florida does have a huge problem with minimum wage violations and not really having anyone to enforce or go after it.
So what you were saying in essence to me is like when you read those things, it's kind of like the Spider-Man meme where everyone's just like pointing at each other. Is that what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. That is unreal. Oh God.
All right.
My question is now once again it goes back to the whole thing. At what point is the turning point? When do you see the polls start to change? And it's funny because you hear people up here, and we're more of a blue area, and you turn around and you hear workers all the time, and they'll say, "Oh, I hate the Democrats. I hate the Democrats." And it's like, at what point is there going to be a progressive candidate, not a stereotypical business Democrat? You know what I'm saying? I feel like you have enough of the business Democrats that kind of pass along these laws and they applaud like mainly a little section of it. Meanwhile, the other half to 2/3 is just demolishing the workforce or demolishing workers' rights. You got to ask yourself, at what point is the turning point? Like for me, I wasn't really involved in a lot of things. I was always pro-union, and I started to really see the importance of our union when we were threatened to be pulled into the Department of Commerce. And for me, that was like, holy shnikes, that would destroy us. That would destroy us. And I just look at this from an outside perspective saying, at what point do you not say, as working class, we need to make a change here in Florida? Because we had a Republican in Bush who got rid of the Department of Labor. Now we have a Republican in DeSantis that is literally taking away our rights or our union that defends our rights, at what point do you think there's going to be that turning point in Florida? Or will it just never be a turning point?
I don't know about that. I will say, like, one interesting thing you were mentioning about how Democrats that are just kind of like they come from like the business environment. There was actually a state Senate candidate who was just elected in Tampa, who is a union brother. He's from the IBEW,
What's his
former
name?
union official, Brian Nathan, Senate District 14, I think, in Tampa, and he does have an election this fall. So if you're interested, if you're in the Tampa area, or even if you're not, and supporting a union brother that is in the Florida Senate who is, committed to protecting and expanding workers' rights, I would suggest looking into his campaign and seeing if there's anything you can do to support.
John, I'm going to put you on that right now. That's your task, brother. You're
I'll
down
reach.
there. The only thing I know about Tampa is there's an awesome bar called Cigar City. I
Yeah.
love that spot. Love that spot. Um, yeah, no, we'll have to look into him because I mean, we need more union brothers and sisters to step up into these roles and to promote the working class. We need
So
people to come in and change these
I think
cultures.
I think McKenna could just speak on this. I think she was just at something last weekend with non-union workers and union workers becoming more educated and militant on reviving labor unions across the country and the world. McKenna,
Mhm.
can you talk about where you just came from this past weekend?
Yeah, so I was at the 2026 Labor Notes Conference. So that's a conference organized every 2 years by the nonprofit Labor Notes. And from what I can tell, I've been going to the past 3 ones, so since 2022, and attendance has just increased like over time. I think this year it was 4,500 plus attendees at least, and they had a waiting list. Somebody said online of like at least 1,000 people waiting to try and get in. So, and these are people from across the world. So I think there were workers representing like 23 different countries that were here or in Chicago this past weekend to talk. I mean, the whole conference is packed with these different workshops and sessions on issues ranging from organizing in the South to how to deal with a union that's like breaking your heart, that's not really standing up for you in the way that you want to, or how to organize in the face of ICE and how to protect and empower immigrant workers, or how to pretty much address any single issue affecting pretty much every single sector in employment, because you will see workers and union organizers from every single sector of employment at the Labor Notes Conference. So that's like teachers, nurses, librarians, utility workers, railroad workers, drivers, pretty much everyone you can think of. And so it's a really energetic, really exciting environment to be part of and to just even be a fly on the wall. I ended up writing a story for a Tampa Alt Weekly that I freelance for, Creative Loafing Tampa Bay. So if you want to learn more about my experience, I wrote a story. It's on cltampa.com right now. But yeah, it was a really uplifting experience, especially coming from Florida, just seeing people that are really invested in the idea of what unions can do for working people.
So that being said, looking at that experience and stuff like that, what are some good words of wisdom as we start to wrap this up for the workforce? What would you say that you could take from labor notes if there was one little piece and you could say this is what you need to know?
So I think we sometimes feel isolated in our battles. Like down here in Florida, it feels hopeless sometimes if you're a unionist facing these attacks on public sector rights and sometimes private sector union rights as well. But when you go to labor notes, you meet people from across the country, you meet people from across the world who are going through the same battles. And you might think that sounds depressing, but it's actually comforting. And it just creates an environment of camaraderie to know that you're not alone fighting these battles.
Any final thoughts, John?
I want to say that I was listening to the Valley Labor Report, and Jacob Morrison was talking about Labor Notes 2026 that he was just at, and that Labor Notes is every 2 years, and they're already looking at a new location. They're usually in Chicago, but every year now the wait list is growing so much that they're selling out before they even get out of the early bird price tickets. So now they're looking for a bigger venue. So maybe in 2 years, the labor notes will have 6,000 people, 6,000 workers attending, and that'll be 2028. That would be the year that Sean Fain is calling for the May 1st International Workers' Day of action. So everyone that's listening, let's plug into labor notes. And I think one of the biggest takeaways that people need to listen to is the southern states, right? You get these blue states, pro-union states, and they're like, oh, what's wrong with the people down in the south? Why don't they just organize? And it goes back to elections have consequences, right? We're so focused on spending money on political campaigns in like the already certain blue states, but they don't dedicate any resources to like the southern states. So I think people need to get involved with local elections as well. So these people that are union busters don't actually end up on our city councils, which is the most bizarre thing in the world. So solidarity with everyone. Thank you, McKenna. I'll let Townie wrap this up.
Yeah, I think my final thought on this whole thing is, when is the tipping point? When is it going to be enough for you to say, maybe I got to look into the mirror and change my perspective on things? I mean, I had that moment, and it just kind of snowballed for me as I started to read and research and look at all these different things. And as we were talking about, it was 1.7 billion spent on union busting. 1.7. Now, imagine billion with a B. Can you imagine if we took that money and invested it in infrastructure of our businesses instead of fear-mongering our workers? Take that money and put it back in. Put it back in. You know, because if you put it back in, you build stronger bridges. And bridges do what? They bring us together. And as always, like I always say, together we are stronger.
When you're in a fight like this, especially with a corporation in this country, no one is going to come down from the mountain and save you.